Hello, it's day 2. I've got that actual book today. Sarah's having a nap, so story time. So where we got to yesterday on the end of our cliffhanger, and then the murder happened. So chapter 3. I say that it was me who found the body of Miss Bell, and it was, but I would never have been there at all if it hadn't been for those crime novels of Daisy's. Matron's fondness for confiscation meant that it was no good trying to read them up at house, so Daisy took to hanging around down at school in the evenings. She joined the Literature Society, slipped Who's body between the pages of Paradise Lost, and sat there peacefully reading it while the others talked. I joined in too, and sat at the back of the room writing up my Detective Society case notes. Everyone thought I was writing poetry. It was after lit, on Monday 29th of October, it's my brother's birthday, that it happened. After school societies end at 5:20, but afterwards Daisy and I hung back in the empty form room so that she could finish The Man in the Queue. Daisy was absorbed, but I was jumpy with worry that we might be late for dinner up at house, and thus incur the awful wrath of Matron. I looked about for my pullover and then remembered with annoyance where I'd left it. "Bother," I said. "Daisy, my pullover's in the gym. Wait for me. I'll just be a minute." Daisy, nose in her book as usual, shrugged vaguely to show that she had heard and continued reading. I looked at my wristwatch again and saw that it was 5:40. If I ran, I would have just enough time, as getting up to house from Old Wing entrance takes 7 minutes and dinner is at 6 o'clock exactly. I pelted along the empty, chalk-smelling corridor of Old Wing and then turned right down to the high, black and white tiled library corridor, my feet echoing in the hush and my chest heaving. Even after a year at Deep Dean, when I run, I still huff and puff in a way that rude Miss Hopkins called determinedly unladylike. I passed the mistress's common room, the library, Mr. McLean's study, the one's cubby, and the hall, and then turned right into the corridor that leads to the gym. There's a school legend that the gym is haunted by the ghost of Verity Abraham. When I first heard it when I was younger, I believed it. I imagined Verity all bloody with her long hair hanging down in front of her face, wearing her pinafore and tie and holding a lacrosse stick. Even now that I'm older and not a shrimp anymore, just knowing that I'm on my way to the gym gives me the shivers. It does not help that the gym corridor is awful. It's packed full of dusty, broken bits of old-school furniture that stand up like people in the gloom. That evening, all the lights were off, and everything was smudged in murky shades of grey and brown. I ran very fast down the corridor, pushing open the doors to the gym and galumphed in, wheezing. And there on the floor was Miss Bell, like the word galumphed. Find out what that one means. Our gym, in case you have not seen it for yourself, is very large with bars and beams all folded up against the walls and wide glass windows. There's a terrifyingly high-up viewing balcony on the side nearest the main door. We're not allowed to go up there alone in case we fall, but since Verity jumped off it, no one wants to. And a little room under that for us to change and leave our kit in, which we call the cupboard. Miss Bell was lying beneath the balcony quite still with her arm thrown back behind her head and her legs folded under her. In my first moment of shock, it did not occur to me that she was dead. I thought I was about to get an awful ticking off for being somewhere I ought not to, and nearly ran away again before she caught sight of me. But then I wondered, what was Miss Bell doing lying there like that? I ran forward and knelt down beside her. I hesitated before touching her, because I had never touched a mistress before, but in the event, it only felt like touching a human being. I patted the shoulder of her white lab coat, hoping most awfully that she would open her eyes and sit up and scold me for being in the gym after hours. But instead, my patting made Miss Bell's head loll away from me. Her glasses slid down off her nose, and I saw that what I had thought was a dark shadow behind her head was actually a dark stain the size of my handkerchief. Some of the stain had spread to the collar of her lab coat, and that part of it was red. I put out my finger and touched the stain, and my finger came away covered in blood. I scrambled backwards, scrubbing my hand against my skirt in horror. It left a long dark smear, and I looked at it, and then Miss Bell, who had still not moved, and felt sick as anything. I had never seen a dead body up close before, but I was quite certain now that Miss Bell was dead. What I ought to do in the circumstances was scream, I thought, but everything was so dark and quiet around me that I couldn't. What I truly wanted to do was tear off my skirt just to get the blood away from me, but my Deep Dean training rose up inside me, making the thought of running about the school half naked somehow far worse than being alone with a corpse. As I thought this, I realised that Miss Bell really was dead, and I was alone with the body. I suddenly remembered the ghost of Verity Abraham and thought that perhaps it was her who killed Miss Bell, pushing her off from exactly the same spot she had jumped from a year ago, and now she might be waiting to do the same to me. It was silly and childish, but all the hairs prickled up on my back and my neck, and Deep Dean training or no, I jumped to my feet and ran out of the gym as fast as I could, as if Miss Bell was going to leap up and run after me. Chapter 4. I was in such a tearing hurry that as I ran back along the corridor, I crashed into several abandoned chairs and scraped my knee quite badly, but I hardly noticed until later. My footsteps were echoing all around me, and dark odd-shaped shadows rose up at the edges of my vision. My breath caught in my throat. I ran all the way back along library corridor to Old Wing and found Daisy at last coming out of the form room where I'd left her. I must have looked a horrible sight, all pink and damp and heaving. Daisy blinked at me curiously. "Whatever's up with you? You're bleeding. We're going to be late for dinner. VO's raging about it." I looked down at myself in surprise and then only saw that I had blood running down my leg from a long cut on my knee. I couldn't feel it at all. It was as though it had happened to another person entirely. "Daisy," I gasped. "Miss Bell's dead." Daisy laughed. "Oh, very funny, Hazel," she said. "Imagine." "Daisy," I said, "this is real. She's dead. She's in the gym, just lying there." Daisy stared at me for a moment, one eye raised, and that was exactly when Virginia Overton came storming out of the classroom behind her and discovered us standing there. Virginia Overton is who Daisy meant by VO. She is the Monday night prefect on duty, the big girl who makes sure we all get back to our houses after socks. And she takes her duties very seriously. She pounds about in her fat, flat feet like a policeman and presses her clipboard to her chest like an officer's notebook. "Wells," she snapped, looming out of the form room doorway at us. "Wong, what do you think you're doing? It's exactly 8 minutes. You will both be late for dinner." "In the gym. It's Miss," she spluttered. "Hazel thinks someone was hurt themselves in the gym," said Daisy smoothly. "She ran back here to get help." Virginia scowled in annoyance. "Oh, honestly," she said, "you lot do make up the most corking fig sometimes." "Oh, I've got low battery. See how we get on." "You have to come and look," I gasped. "Please." Virginia looked from me to Daisy and then back to me again. "If this is one of your games," she warned. I dragged her back to the gym and with Daisy following. The English mistress, Miss Tennyson, was standing outside Mr. McLean's study at the end of the corridor, talking to sharp-faced, red-haired Mademoiselle, the French mistress. I don't know how Miss Tennyson can understand her. Mademoiselle has a dreadfully strong French accent. Her lessons are a terrible struggle. And grubby old Mr. McLean himself, all three turned and watched us as we went by. In fact, we were making so much noise that the one stuck his head out of the little cubby to see what the fuss was. The one had his own little office room in the hall at the end of the library corridor, just next to Mr. McLean's study. He can't use the mistress's common room at the other end, of course, because he's a man. "Problem, Virginia?" Mr. McLean called, and Virginia snapped. "I doubt it, sir." As Virginia and Daisy walked through the gym door, I stopped and clicked the main light switch on triumphantly. "There she is," I said, pointing. "I told you." But then I looked down the line of my arm to the place where a few minutes before Miss Bell had been lying. Miss Bell was gone. The gym was quite empty and still. There was only a little dark smear on the polished wooden floor to show where her head had been. I was still gasping from shock of it when Virginia spoke. "Good heavens," she said, "what a surprise. There is no one here. There will be no dinner for either of you tonight. You for lying and you for encouraging her." "But she was there," I cried. "Honest, she was. Look," I said, pointing to the dark smear. "That's blood. Somebody must have come back here and wiped it up and—" Virginia snorted. "And I'm the Emperor of Japan," she said in a superior tone of voice. "They did no such thing because there never was anybody, as you well know. And as for the blood, well, your knee is bleeding. I suppose you thought I wouldn't notice. You've got it on your skirt as well. This is quite one of the most elaborate pieces of nonsense I've ever come across. You really ought to be ashamed. But then, where you come from, I don't suppose they teach you that it's wrong to lie, do they?" I bit my lip and wished as hard as I could that I had found Virginia Overton lying on the gym floor. "Now come along up to house, both of you. I hope Matron gives you a frightful rollicking for this later. That's all I can say." And with that, she seized us by the arm and frog-marched us out of the gym, muttering about her useless third-formers. I was scarlet with rage and shame. I really had seen Miss Bell lying there. I knew it, but there was no evidence to show that I hadn't made it all up. Virginia walked us back past Mademoiselle, Miss Tennyson and Mr. McLean. Mademoiselle chuckled and said, "False alarm?" "Very," Virginia told her, and kept on walking. I wondered for a bit if I were mad. This sort of thing simply does not happen outside of Daisy's books. It was ridiculous. But then, as Virginia rushed out through the bright lights and wood panelling of Old Wing entrance, I happened to glance down at my skirt and saw the dark, strange street across it. I opened up the palm of my hand towards me and saw that my index finger had a faint tide mark of red around its tip. I closed my hand up again in a tight ball, but I knew that I was not mad in the slightest. Chapter 5. Even at this furious pace, Virginia was pulling us up the hill. We had still not quite reached house when the dinner gong sounded. I flinched automatically when I heard it in the distance, which was my Deep Dean training coming out again. One of the first things you learn at Deep Dean is that bells are sacred. Our lives are parcelled up into the spaces between one and the next, and to ignore the summons is simply criminal. The most important bell of all is the house dinner gong. If you hear it and do not respond to it, or worse, if you are not there to hear it at all, well, there will be no dinner for you. I knew, of course, that we were in much greater trouble than simply missing the dinner goal, but all the same, I couldn't help reacting to it. People were still filing in as we came through the main house doors and into the peeling old front hallway. But wait here, snapped Virginia, and we were forced to loiter nervously between the big hall clock, which informed us that we were a whole 4 minutes late, as she went storming upstairs to fetch Matron. Matron did not look happy to hear what Virginia had to say. Her mean piggy eyes glared at us from beneath her regulation cap, and she breathed heavily through her nose. When Virginia had finished, there was a lull. I could hear the babble from the dining room through the closed swing doors. Great adjectives in here. Babble, I like that one as well. Oh no, that's a noun. Then Matron came streaming up to us, whacked us both round the head, me harder than Daisy, because after all, she had only abetted my lies, and sent us up to our dorm without dinner to think about what we'd done. As we trailed up to the scuffed blue carpet on the front stairs, I saw Matron going in to dinner with Virginia by her side. They were muttering together and giving us dark backward looks so we would know how out of favour we were. I was feeling horribly depressed at not being believed. As well as that, thinking about what I'd seen in the gym gave me a nasty taste in my mouth, like the beginning of being sick. Daisy, though, was in very good spirits. As soon as the dorm door swung closed and we were properly alone, she sat down on the bed with a bounce and a crunch. Our beds are not supposed to be comfortable, and said, "Explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said, sitting down next to her and feeling sicker than ever. "I saw Miss Bell lying in the gym. She must have fallen from the balcony. She was absolutely stone cold dead, and I didn't make it up." "Well, I know you didn't," said Daisy, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to come across the corpse of science mistresses in diverted gymnasiums. "You'd never tell a lie like that." "Perhaps Lavinia, but not you. Are you sure she was really dead, though?" At that, I sat up indignantly, but then I remembered the way Miss Bell's head lolled and felt sick again. I touched her and she was still warm, but dead as anything, I said. "She flopped, I told you. She must have fallen off the balcony." Daisy sniffed. "Fallen. What do you mean?" I asked. My skin crawled. I had been so busy horrified at the fact that Miss Bell was dead that I had not thought properly about how it might have happened. "It's quite obvious," said Daisy. "No one falls to their death and then gets up and tidies themselves away, do they? When you first found the body, it could have just been by accident. An accident. But when we came racing back 5 minutes later to find nobody at all where one used to be, well, someone must have pushed her, then got rid of the evidence." I gulped. "Do you mean she's been murdered?" "Yes," said Daisy. "Don't tell me you didn't think of that before." "Oh, Hazel, how exciting. A real murder at Deep Dean. Of course, there's always a chance I'm quite wrong. Perhaps you just came in at the wrong moment and misunderstood things." "I did not," I said, annoyed again. "Or we simply missed the rescue party somehow. Well, if it is that, and how I hope it isn't, we'll know as soon as we get in tomorrow morning. It'll all be over school like mumps. But if it isn't," I asked, although I really knew the answer. "If it isn't," said Daisy, bouncing on her bed again and beaming at me, "then our detective society has just found our best case yet." Okay, so now we know part of what the storyline's going to be. Make sure you're all staying safe, staying inside. Keep washing your hands. It's good to see how you're all getting on with your work. Let us know if you do have any problems. And see you tomorrow.